everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here and you're wondering how that happened, whether you're into handmade crafts, intrigue of criminal cases, or the mysteries that lie beneath, stick around, hit that like button, and subscribe because you have found your people. By the end of this video, you'll see a handcrafted product come to life as we journey through another criminal case. Check out the description box below for more details on the product that I'm creating, and feel free to check out our website while you're there. Now, let's get into today's story. In the early 2000s, during my teenage years, my mother managed an apartment complex in Kansas City, Missouri, where we also lived. The complex was not just our home, but also the hub of our social life. I attended the neighborhood middle and high school, both within walking distance, which made our apartment a popular hangout spot. I fondly remember mornings when my friends would come over before school, and my mother would pass out snacks before we left for the day. It was also where my cheerleading squad would sometimes gather for sleepovers, or if we had spare time before a big game. These memories of togetherness and camaraderie have stayed with me into adulthood. However, amidst these fond memories, the complex held many secrets. Across the deck on the third floor, there was a frequent visitor with a noticeable presence. He would arrive in a large garbage truck that partially blocked the narrow driveway that led into the parking lot. I didn't know much about him, just that he seemed a bit out of place and was coming to visit his young daughter. I would wave at him when he arrived, a small gesture of acknowledgement, but there was something about him that gave me an uneasy feeling. Little did I know, his connection to our community ran deeper than I imagined. The mother of his child, a familiar face as the school nurse, added a layer of complexity to his visits. As time passed, I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that accompanied his visits. The sight of that familiar garbage truck became a chilling reminder of the mysteries that can hide behind a seemingly normal facade. It wasn't until 2004 that I learned the truth about that man I casually waved at. The Kansas City Strangler is what they were calling him, a name that would become infamous for the darkness that lurked within him. His dark past cast a shadow over those seemingly ordinary moments from my youth, forever changing the way I viewed the world around me. That man was Lorenzo Gilyard Jr. Lorenzo Jerome Gilyard Jr. entered the world on May 24, 1950 in Kansas City, Missouri, the second of 5 children born to Lorenzo Sr. and Laura Gilyard. From his early years, Lorenzo's behavior set him apart. As he grew, so did his reputation for aggression. School proved no exception. Despite playing sports with his brothers, his size often led him to bully smaller children. This sounds like the makings of every serial killer ever. His academic career was troubled by poor performance and frequent absences, culminating in his dropping out after the 10th grade. In the mid-1960s, Lorenzo crossed paths with Rena Hill, and their relationship quickly deepened. They married on November 20th, 1968, prompted by Rena's pregnancy. However, married life did not deter Lorenzo's descent into criminality and troubling behavior, particularly his deviant actions towards women. In 1969, Gilyard was arrested on charges of assaulting and raping a girl he knew, but was later released when a reconciliation agreement was reached between the two parties, with the victim retracting the charges after Lorenzo apologized to her. In 1970, Gilyard's father was convicted of rape. 2 years later, Gilyard himself was arrested again for raping and assaulting another woman, with the victim claiming that he had choked her into unconsciousness. She identified Gilyard as the culprit from a lineup, but her testimony was considered questionable, and the charges were subsequently dropped. In 1973, Gilyard was arrested for assaulting his wife, with Hill telling police that he had been physically and sexually abusive for all the years that they had been married. Ultimately, he was forced to pay a fine and to divorce his wife. In February 1974, Gilyard was arrested for raping a 25-year-old exotic dancer who identified him as her attacker from a photograph. But yet again, the charges were dropped when the two parties reached a reconciliation agreement. 5 months later, he was arrested again for raping the 13-year-old daughter of a friend on the banks of the Missouri River. As the victim changed her testimony, the rape charges were dropped, but Gilyard was convicted of sexual acts with a minor and received a 9-month sentence in the Jackson County Jail. After his release, Gilyard married a second time, but his wife soon left him and filed for divorce, claiming that, like Raina Hill, she was beaten and sexually abused by her husband. In the late 1970s, Gilyard married a third time. In 1979, Gilyard was arrested on charges of assaulting a young couple, raping the girl, and threatening to kill her fiancé. Despite the fact that the victims identified him as their attacker, Gilyard was acquitted by jury verdict at his September 1980 trial due to lack of evidence. A few months later, he was arrested for aggravated assault on his third wife, but got away with an administrative fine and a divorce. In February 1981, Gilyard attacked his ex-wife on 2 separate occasions. In the first one, he knocked out her front teeth, and in the second, he stabbed her in the hand with an ice pick. He was arrested and charged with third-degree assault, but was let go on a suspended sentence and probation. In November 1981, Gilyard was arrested for theft but was released on a $3,500 bail. That same spring, he received a 4-year prison sentence for violating his probation. During his incarceration, his sister Patricia, a prostitute, was convicted of murdering a client in 1983 and sentenced to 11 years imprisonment, in addition to being implicated in the murder of another prostitute. On January 10, 1983, Gilyard was paroled, but was soon returned to prison after he was arrested in Wyandotte County, Kansas, for making bomb threats. He was released again in late 1985, and in January 1986, he got a job as a garbage man where his father worked in the maintenance department. I am going to post a picture because I wasn't even going to attempt to say this word. On December 23, 1987, Gilyard was arrested and interrogated as a potential suspect in the murder of 36-year-old Sheila Ingold, during which his blood sample was taken, but he was released due to lack of evidence. In 1989, Gilyard's brother Daryl was convicted of a drug-related homicide and sentenced to life without parole. We haven't even made it to the 90s yet, and we have half the family in and out of prison for domestic violence, sexual assault, homicide. At what point was Jackson County sick of seeing the Gilyards in their courtroom? I mean, I still have more to go. Okay, back to the story. In 1991, Gilyard married for a 4th time and was promoted to company supervisor, granting him control over several garbage disposal teams in various parts of Kansas City. In July 1996, Gilyard's neighbor went to the police claiming that she had been sexually harassed by him since September of 1995. No charges were brought against him, and the woman moved away soon after. In 2001, the Kansas City Police Department embarked on a mission to revisit unsolved cases, armed with a new weapon, advanced DNA technology. This initiative was fueled by a multi-million-dollar federal grant and a glimmer of hope for those seeking justice for the victims of heinous crimes. Among the cases under scrutiny was the haunting series of murder that had cast a shadow over Kansas City for over a decade. 6 women, their lives cut short between April 1977 and January 1993, all met a similar fate, death by strangulation. These women, aged between 15 and 36, were found in various grim locations: landfills, snowdrifts, abandoned buildings, vans, fields, and parking lots, each crime scene telling a chilling story of brutality. The breakthrough came when investigators re-examined a blood sample taken from Lorenzo Gilyard, a man who had long been on their radar. Gilyard was conclusively linked to the murders of 6 women, including Sheila Ingold, a case that had remained unsolved since 1987. Oh, but the evidence didn't stop there. Through a web of circumstantial evidence, Gilyard was also implicated in the deaths of at least 6 more women, each victim strangled with items ranging from nylon stockings to laces and wire. The victims, mostly known prostitutes, shared a grim commonality. Their bodies were found either fully or partially naked, bearing the scars of sexual assault. For years, these murders had been seen as isolated incidents, until 1994 when forensic analysis linked 2 of the cases together, revealing a terrifying pattern. On April 16, 2004, the long arm of the law finally caught up with Lorenzo Gilyard. He was arrested and charged with 12 counts of first-degree murder, a day that marked a significant step towards closure for the families of the victims and the city of Kansas City as a whole. Stacy was just 17 when she arrived in Kansas City looking for a fresh start. But her dreams were shattered on April 10, 1977, when she was last seen alive. A week later, her lifeless body was discovered in a vacant lot, showing signs of suffocation. The authorities soon learned that Stacy had been working as a sex worker. 3 years later, tragedy struck again with the death of Gwendolyn, just 15 years old. Gwendolyn was reported missing by her father on January 23, 1980. The following day, her body was found strangled with wire tightly wrapped around her neck and wrists. Gwendolyn, like Stacy, had been involved in prostitution, a heartbreaking reality that highlighted the vulnerability of young girls on the streets of Kansas City. The list of victims continued to grow, each story more heartbreaking than the last. Margaret, age 17, was found strangled on May 9, 1982. Catherine, age 34, discovered in an abandoned building on March 14, 1986, with a stocking wrapped tightly around her neck. Naomi, age 23, a student and single mother, found strangled in a park on August 16, 1986, forced into prostitution due to her financial struggles. Deborah Sue, Ann Barnes, Kelly Ford, Angela Mayhew, Sheila Ingold, Carmeline Hibbs, and Connie Lynn, all victims of a ruthless killer who preyed on the vulnerable women of Kansas City. Each life taken too soon, each death leaving a void in the hearts of those who knew them. As the years passed, the killings continued, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. The city was gripped by fear, wondering when the next victim would be claimed by the so-called Kansas City Strangler. It wasn't until 1993 that the string of murders finally came to an end with the death of Connie Lynn, a 29-year-old prostitute found strangled in a snowdrift, her life cut short by a killer who had haunted the streets of Kansas City for too long. In January 2007, Gilyard's attorneys were able to negotiate an agreement with the Jackson County Attorney's Office. In exchange for dropping the death penalty, their client would agree to a trial without a jury, which began on March 5th of that year. Gilyard was tried on 7 first-degree murder charges. The prosecution focused mainly on DNA evidence that criminal forensic experts said indicates he had sex with the victims around the time that they were killed. It was quoted, "All the victims have several things in common. All were found dead during the same 1.5-year period. All were left in secluded or obstructed locations. All were strangled. All showed signs that they were involved in a struggle. All were missing their shoes, and all but one showed distinct signs of sexual intercourse. This is what the prosecution stated in opening statements to the court. Throughout the proceedings, Gilyard refused to admit his guilt and insisted on his innocence. 12 days later, Gilyard was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murders of Berry, Kelly, Barnes, Ford, Ingold, and Hibbs. He was acquitted of killing Mayhew, since only human hair and no semen were found on her body, and the results of a DNA analysis of said hair being inconclusive. In 2018, Lorenzo Gilyard found himself thrust once more into the public eye when he sat down for an interview with British journalist and presenter Piers Morgan. In this interview, Gilyard maintained his innocence, adamantly asserting that he had never crossed paths with any of his victims. I'll leave a link below in the description box where you can watch the full interview. That being said, let's keep the discussion alive in the comments. I'm curious to know your thoughts on how the justice system handles cases like Lorenzo Gilyard's, or if you yourself have ever crossed paths unknowingly with a serial killer as I did in my teenage years. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Until next time, self-care and stay safe.